Greetings, APUSHers. Welcome to APUS History with Lennox. I am Lennox, and today we are diving into U.S. History Topic 1.4, the Columbian Exchange, Spanish Exploration, and Conquest. Now, the big idea that I really want you to walk away from today is that the Columbian Exchange resulted in this massive changes in both Europe as well as in the Americas. Now, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with the Columbian Exchange, the transfer of people, animals, plants, and germs between the Americas and Europe. What you might not know was the profound effect that the Columbian Exchange had on cultures throughout the world. I would go as far as saying that the Columbian Exchange completely changed world cultures, and they're never going to go back. We are going to see that the Columbian Exchange transformed societies, transformed economies, as well as transformed the environment. So let's get into it. Let's look a little bit closer at the Columbian Exchange. Now, as I said a few seconds ago, it was the transfer of peoples, plants, animals, and germs. I want to start by talking about the plants and the animals. Previously in topic 1.2, we talked about how there were a number of Native American cultures in the Americas that relied on agriculture. So the Columbian Exchange is going to introduce all these new crops to North America. And these are eventually going to become staple crops for the English colonies going forward. So this plays a huge role, not only in the current time period, but also time periods coming up in future lessons. So when we're talking about staple crops, I'm talking about rice and wheat and rye and soybeans. These are the type of crops that were introduced to the Americas by the Europeans. Some others that you might not realize, citrus fruits are another plant that was introduced to the Americas, lemons and oranges. Where would we be without orange juice and lemonade? So thank you, Columbian Exchange. But it wasn't just a one-way transfer of plants. Plants also went from the Americas into Europe. And these included commodities such as maize or corn, tomatoes, potatoes, chocolate. Don't get me started on how much I like chocolate. When we talk about animals, I think there was more of an effect of the transfer of animals in the Americas than what you saw in Europe. Now, I'll give you one that went from the Americas to Europe, the turkey. There you go. You're welcome. But let's look at what came into the Americas. And we're talking primarily domesticated animals. Animals like cattle and pigs and chickens. But without a doubt, the animal that had the most profound effect on life in the Americas for the Native Americans is going to be the horse. Again, we talked about in topic 1.2 how there were a large number of Native American tribes who lived this hunter-gatherer type lifestyle. They followed game wherever it went, and you saw this especially in the Plains region. Well, when the horse was introduced, it's going to change the way the Native Americans live. It's going to change the way they move. It's going to change the way they hunt. It's going to change the way they fight. And so the horse has a monumental effect on Native Americans. So that's plants and animals. Now let's talk about the big one, diseases and germs. The introduction of germs by the Europeans in the Americas had a devastating effect on Native American populations. Over the years, we're going to see over 90% of the Native American population wiped out simply due to disease. Well, Lennox, how does that happen? How can that possibly be? The simple answer is this. The Native Americans isolated over in the Americas had never been exposed to the germs that you saw Europeans, Asians, and Africans commonly exposed to. Remember, before the Europeans came to the Americas, you had interactions between Europe, Asia, and Africa for generations. Well, when the Europeans come over and they introduce these new germs, the natives have no immunity to any of those germs. And without immunity, your body can't fight those germs when they come in. And there was no advanced medical technology that could help heal them. It was either you survived it or you died from it. A couple examples of those diseases: smallpox, influenza, typhoid. So when we talk about the effect of disease, I can't understate that enough. Let me give you an example of the Aztec. In a previous video, I talked about the Aztecs, which were located in modern-day Mexico, had a capital city, Tenochtitlan. And Tenochtitlan had a population of about 300,000 people. 300,000. Now remember that number. Hernan Cortez, a conquistador from Spain, is going to come in with 1,000 men. Now he did have a little help from some of the local tribes who were enemies of the Aztecs, but essentially he's relying on his 1,000 men. And in a matter of months, those 1,000 men were able to bring the Aztecs to their knees. He completely disabled this entire empire. And it wasn't the fighting skills. And it wasn't the fighting skills of Cortez and his men. It was the fact that the Aztec population was completely wiped out by disease and weakened so much that it was very easy for Cortez to go in and take control of the empire. You're going to see this throughout early American history. As Europeans come in and the natives are interacting with them, disease becomes the number one killer of the natives. So you can see how the Columbian Exchange had a profound effect on the people and the cultures of the Americas. But what about the effect on Europeans? Well, the simple and straightforward answer is they made a lot of money. Spain became wealthy due to the Columbian Exchange. And as the exchange grew, so did the economies in Europe. What we saw was a shift politically in Europe from a political system of feudalism to, as the wealth grew, we saw Europe start to shift to an economic system of capitalism or private ownership. And as more and more Europeans, specifically the Spanish, were making money in the Americas, more and more European powers started to look towards the Americas to colonize. We're going to see the French come in, the Dutch, and the English, all in order. And it all started with what's going on in the early 1500s with the Spanish. Now, the Spanish are going to go in and they're going to look to extract as much. They're also driven by religious motivation, which we'll talk about in the next video. But what I want to talk about briefly is the labor systems that the Spanish are going to put in place in North America as well as in Europe. Initially, the Spanish are going to try to use natives as slave labor. But due to the rampant disease that was spreading, it was hard to sustain that labor force. They also tried to take Native Americans into Europe as a slave labor force, but the same thing happened over there. It was at that point that the Spanish realized they had to find a more sustainable labor force. And that's when the first African slaves were brought to the Americas by the Portuguese traders. It was in the Spanish colonies that African slavery was first introduced. Now we're going to talk a whole lot more about that in future videos, but I want you to be familiar with that right now. Finally, I want to talk about a new system of finance that's going to be introduced during this time. Colonization is expensive. And what we're going to see is the introduction of an entity called a joint stock company. This is essentially you bring in a number of investors to put their money forward in order to start a colony or to start a business. Again, we're going to talk a lot more about that in Unit 2, but it was introduced during this time period. So there you have it. Topic 1.4. If you have any questions, as usual, just stick them down in the comments. I'll be happy to answer as quickly as I can. Other than that, we're going to see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.